Ooh, sounds like my kind of game company.
Right, yeah, I think we'll get started. Yeah, thanks again to those of you guys. Thanks again. I'm saying that because I was just on stage doing this in another room, not with Mike, but so sorry to those of you that are in the Media Molecule panel and have already seen me.
Double feature.
But, yeah, exactly. You get double feature of me, you lucky things. So, yeah, no, but thank you for coming. I'm sure some of you had late nights last night and so on, so it's appreciated. We are obviously here to see or listen to, and to see and listen to Mike Bithell. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Which one are you more here for?
I've just come to look.
You're coming, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, warm welcome to Mike.
And to you. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess, you know, as I was saying to Mike before, the fact that you guys are in the room probably means you know who Mike is, but just in case, a really quick little intro to who you are.
So I'm Mike, hello. I'm mainly on Twitter. That's my main thing. And then, I made a game called Thomas Was Alone, which was about rectangles with feelings, etc. And then Volume, Earthshape, which nobody played, Subsurface Circular and Quarantine Circular, and then now working on John Wick.
And John Wick Hex, obviously, is, you know, that's going to be the main thrust of what we're talking about. Just to give a little context, you know, about what kind of game it is, because I guess most strikingly it's quite a relatively unexpected interpretation of the source material, like it's a concurrent action game. What does that mean?
I've no idea.
No idea.
It's kind of where we ended up. So the question was just generally how and why.
Start talking, Mike. No, I guess just, you know, a little insight to John. I guess let's just talk about that thing. Start it. I'm going to change the order of all of these.
Do it.
You were watching a John Wick movie and arrived at what might be a less than typical way of interpreting an action
That's
film.
a great way to say I was talking down the pub with a mate about...
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. I think most game devs do it. Like, you watch a movie and you're like, oh, if they were to do a video game, it should be like this. And that was basically how it started, we'd watched John Wick a little while before. We'd gone to see another action movie which wasn't as good. We were coming out of that and talking crap about this other action movie that wasn't as good. Oh, it's not as good as John Wick, is it? Which, you know, I'm not going to say what the film was. And we were just chatting about that. And yeah, Ben Andak was, I always say Andak now because in all the interviews and on the Wikipedia page for John Wick, he's just called Ben.
Right.
And it's horrible. He should have his full name. He was like, what would you do with John Wick? And I just, prattled on like you would. But my big thing was you don't do an action game. Because an action game is you're going to play it clumsily. Because I would. Like when I'm playing like Uncharted, if you were just to film me playing Uncharted, that's not going to look like Indiana Jones. It's a guy running around circle strafing and doing stupid stuff. And John Wick is such a precise, specific style of action that it kind of felt like you had to do something else with it and more get into the thinking and the strategy and the choreography. So I pitched, just talking on the tube, like it would be cool if it was a strategy game. I didn't realize he'd been sent out to kind of scout for weird indie devs to do something interesting with John Wick. And he was like, well, make a prototype. So we started playing with it and kind of went from there.
And I guess that's the striking thing, right? A strategy game was not necessarily the most obvious way of capturing gunplay.
Some would say
and
stupid.
So on, or gun fu. So, you know, why did John Wick lend it? Like, what is it about that film that made you feel a strategy game is the right way to interpret action sequences?
So for me, it was largely. I don't know if other people feel like this. It's a really interesting thing when you're trying to do something like this. And you're collaborating with the film studio and stuff, is trying to work out if the thing you like about the thing is what like everyone else likes about the thing.
Right.
So I didn't know going in like if this was true of everyone, but the way I watch John Wick is it's kind of like how you watch the Mission Impossible movies. You're enjoying a good like action movie with a nice world building and whatever, but you're also watching Keanu or Tom Cruise beating themselves up, doing weird stuff, like, wow, he learned how to do that? That's amazing. Like, you're enjoying it on kind of the craft level as well. You're enjoying the kind of the choreography and the training and I think you can see that in the way they kind of market these movies, is they take pains to talk about that and talk about what the fight choreography is and how this action's put together. It's Chad who directs them, is from a stunt background and definitely comes to it with that eye. So the thing I really liked about John Wick was that fight choreography and the dance of it all. And I thought that would be interesting as a gamer to try and work out how you take that and make that into a video game. How do you, it came up in interviews a lot at E3 where it's like, it was more about like, if we treat the movies as like the best Let's Player of this game ever, what's the game that John Wick's playing? What's the thing that results in that footage? And just kind of working, kind of reverse engineering it. So that was the focus for me, was making something that was about that fight choreography. And then finding out that like people agree, which is nice, which is terrifying.
Well, yeah, I guess how did you approach that? Because obviously initially you didn't really realise you were actually talking to someone who might be interested in you making the game, but eventually you've got to convince the purse holders.
Yeah, I can't overstate, like that first conversation was just two idiots talking on a train. Like, it wasn't like some amazing, I didn't come down from the mountain with stone tablets with the design for John Wick on it. It was more kind of just
That is your
two
standard
guys.
process for the previous games.
Mate, I go through so much stone. So, like, and it takes forever because you got to get the chiseling right.
He's got his own quarry in his back garden.
It's true, it's true.
But, you know, you had to...
That's weight. But yeah, you had to then go and convince
them. And as I understand it, the original thing you were showing them was a little different from where it went.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing that I kind of didn't realize. So often with licensed games, and I've worked on a few licensed games before this at other studios, usually what happens is a publisher reaches out to you, much like this, and says, hey, we've got access to this IP, do something with it, and they basically give you like, usually it's like they give you like a Bible or like materials, like which are like, here's the 400-page document that expresses what this children's cartoon is. Okay, and then you make a game based on that. Here it was much more, because they didn't really want that kind of relationship. Lionsgate, they're much more collaborative. They wanted to treat this as like they would a regular project that they were working on themselves. Which in Hollywood means lots of meetings and lots of conversations, and you're constantly, and I've talked to other people, and this is just how Hollywood kind of works, is that you're constantly like repitching something. So if you're directing a movie and it's like a family film, you're gonna have to fly over and do the meeting with McDonald's about like where you pitch them the movie you're already making to kind of talk it up to them and explain to them like how it works so they can make the right, you know, Happy Meal toy or whatever. And here, so that's very much how Hollywood works. It's a kind of a constantly reiterating what you're doing. And it's a really nice process, because what you find through doing that is essentially you get very good at selling the game. You get very good at talking about it, and you start to in those conversations find where the game is. And you're not doing it in public. It's not like you're going out and doing interviews and like making up features to sound cool on stage. You're doing that, but in private rooms where you can kind of play with things. So one of the big ones for us was our first prototype was essentially XCOM with one character. We basically cloned XCOM with one character. And it kind of sucked, and we kind of knew it sucked, but we weren't quite sure. We weren't sure whether it was us messing up or whether it was that John Wick was like, oh God, is John Wick not a strategy game? Like, it was that kind of moment. And taking it to some of these meetings in Hollywood and having like execs, and there's one guy I've brought up in a fair few interviews called Jason, who's Lionsgate's kind of, I don't know the exact term, but is in charge of the franchise essentially from Lionsgate's perspective, with an external studio, Thunder Road, to actually kind of make them. And he just asked me in one of these conversations, like, why does John keep waiting for the other guy to shoot him? John doesn't do that. And then I got a little bit cocky and said, well, actually, it's a turn-based strategy game, and it's the turn-based strategy genre. And I start pulling up videos of Mario and Rabbids, because that's like, because I know XCOM he's going to look at and go, that's sci-fi. We're not a sci-fi thing, but I know Mario and Rabbids is kind of, basically people who don't know games know Mario, so it's kind of a safe thing to put up on the screen. And I was like, Mario and Rabbit, see how Mario's letting that rabbit, let's not worry about the story of this game, but see how Mario is letting the rabbit shoot him, that's turn-based. And as I'm doing it, I'm just realizing, oh, this is terrible. I'm explaining why my game sucks because genre exists. And it's kind of one of those moments where, we go back and we were already talking about like, what can we do? And that's what led to what we ended up with, which is this kind of concurrent timeline system. So no one pauses, no one waits. Essentially, it's kind of like video editing. You're queuing up actions you're going to do. They're queuing up actions they're going to do. And everything kind of runs out in real time with each other. And what was very cool was that makes the game actually kind of interesting and original outside of the IP. And what we found at E3, people coming along because it's John Wick with kind of a skeptical, like, really, you're making a strategy game of John Wick? And then they play it and they're like, oh, this is actually an interesting, innovative game, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting, there's a few strategy games that are playing with similar systems. I think it was definitely in the zeitgeist. It was in the ether, that idea of kind of, can we go beyond turn-based?
And that's interesting, you know, there's the cliche, I mean, maybe it's slightly a shade out of date compared to how it was 5 years, 10 years ago, but the cliche still exists that licensed IP games from major movies are kind of lazy or generic or, you know, obvious. And you know, you might even imagine... You might even imagine the studio carrying on, the film studio kind of being quite controlling. And I know they've got their IP Bible and so on, but it almost sounds like it was quite a helpful kind of iteration and development and creative experience having to
the next
interact with those guys.
That example of Jason saying, you know, why is he waiting his turn? I showed him Mario and Rabbids, and he capitulated. He was like, okay, well, you're the game designer, fair enough. Like,
right.
It wasn't like a dictate, and it's never been like. There's never been. People assume that they'd be very heavy-handed, that they would be locking in. I think we went in understanding the universe of John Wick, kind of those first few conversations. Like, I think I avoided several of the pitfalls that other people kind of coming into the franchise had made in terms of, like, there were things I'm not allowed to talk about the story yet, but like there are obvious ideas that come to mind when you're thinking about John Wick of stories you could tell in that universe, and you shouldn't, because a big part of John Wick is you don't want to do the prequel where you establish like how Han Solo got his left shoe.
Right.
No one needs that about John Wick. You don't need to know everything about this guy's history. So I think things like that, the having that understanding of the franchise, because we're fans, we didn't come to them with many bad ideas. Where we came to them with a bad idea, it was usually a game design bad idea that they were accepting of, because it's like, well, Mike, you're the guy in the room who knows how to design games, right? And then me going away and going, actually, I can do better, you know. And it was more productive than that. So it was very nice. And then in terms of the kind of the underbaked feel of a lot of licensed games, I think that often comes down to having to hit release dates, having a very short development time. And we've been fortunate in that we've had a longer development time, and there was never an expectation that we would ever hit the launch of the movie. We always planned to kind of use the movie as a marketing beat, essentially, to kind of announce the game and do its thing. But there was, you know, we were never aiming for that date, and I think that made things more flexible.
I wanted to talk, actually, you know, something sort of put a little smile on my face when I doing the research for this and saw a couple of interviews where you kind of accidentally say the words John Wick when you meant the player, and vice versa. And that to go back to that point you made, you know, we play Uncharted and I enjoy that series, but it wouldn't make a movie, me, the camera reeling about and me running into things. But how did you go about, I guess, reverse engineering gameplay from what the film is and making sure the player felt, you know, that thing of being John Wick, not being someone in a game?
Yeah, or in just another kind of action movie, right?
Yeah, right.
Because it's interesting that, like, you definitely see the John Wick style of fight scene popping up more and more in other things. People kind of essentially ripping off what they've created in that stuff. It's like you say, it's reverse engineering. I'm glad that's coming across. Like, we looked at a lot of, at the very early stages, we looked at a lot of licensed games and said, okay, which are the ones that we like? And which are the ones that, like, gamers like? And the one unifying thing we found across the board was that, and this was kind of simultaneous to us, you know, talking to the studio about making these tweaks and doing something different with it, was the thing that makes good licensed games good, in my opinion, is they use the license and the franchise they're a part of to innovate. They don't just take a thing and let's make. I was about to literally use an example that was released about a month ago, so I'm going to stop there. But let's not make game X, but just paint franchise on it. Let's do something that actually extends on it. So something like Batman Arkham Asylum. That's a weird pitch for a game. We're going to make a stealth brawler with gadgets and whatever. If you were making that without the Batman IP, it would be a big, tough sell to the audience of, like, this is a completely different kind of game than you've played before. Oh, and we've got to have vehicle mechanics. Obviously not in the first one, but yeah. with the franchise, it's the perfect solution to that problem, and I think that makes sense. And even in when you have, and obviously John Wick is brilliant, but like even when you have a mediocre property like Chronicles of Riddick, they absolutely created a bunch of mechanics that were so fresh to games because they were completely true to the movie. So we tried to take the same thing. So we literally went through the movie. We went through. I think the one we really focused on initially was the Red Circle fights and the club where he starts in the bathrooms and changing rooms and then works his way up through this whole nightclub, in several stages. And we said, okay, that's a level. Like, what are they doing? Why is he doing it? And it really comes down to the thinking like John Wick thing, because it's a strategy game, right? The main thing you're doing in a strategy game is working out plots for what you want to do next. So going through those movies and going, okay, why is he throwing his gun? That seems really stupid and cool, but why would you ever actually do it? Okay, it's because that guy's, and just kind of working out the logic behind that. And what's really cool and helps us a great deal is that's also how they think about these fight scenes. So when they're choreographing, when they're setting this stuff up, they are paying attention to this stuff. They know that the audience is paying attention to how many bullets are in the gun. They know that, and I mean, Chad is a nerd when it comes to that stuff in a really good way. Like, he really cares, and so does the stunt team, so do the specialists involved in all areas of it. And that actually means that you can kind of see through the Matrix. There you go, another reference. You can kind of look through it, and you can go, oh no, he's throwing his gun because 1, 2, 3, he's used up the whole clip. So that gun's now empty. It's useless to him in any sense other than a blunt object because he hasn't got time to reload because that guy's coming towards him. So he throws it. That guy's going to be stunned for a moment, giving him time to pull out another gun or to reload a gun. And you're kind of putting this stuff together. You're like, okay, now we can make a game because we can build a game where that's a walkthrough, and you start working out. And game devs always do this. These player stories where you're like, you run into the room and then this happens and this happens. We had a movie of that. We had a movie we could look to, which was that's the player story, and then just kind of work it back. And
that's interesting, as you were describing a John Wick movie fight, and then suddenly, without really changing what you're describing, you could have been describing nuanced gameplay mechanics, right? Rather than, I guess, and it's the other option of choosing a genre and painting a.
And it's definitely there's been observations online of like, but John Wick's already a video game, and you're like, that commenter is right, and that's very rare that you get to have that moment emotionally. But you're like, that commenter's right. John Wick is a video game. There's a logical set of systems and interactions there, and if we can capture that in a game, and essentially then just all that good game design stuff, where you're just breaking stuff down into verbs. It's like, okay, so he throws the gun, that's an action. He throws a gun. The thrown gun has a stun effect on the enemy. Okay, so we need a system which will allow for that to be a thing that could happen, and you kind of just start breaking this down into modules, and then once you've got those playing pieces, you can go, oh, well, what if there's, and we have like at E3, there was a specific journalist who was playing the game who invented something I like to call the extreme reload, right. Which is whenever his gun ran out of ammo, he still had a clip in his pocket, but he was running out of ammo in the gun. He would throw his gun at a guy who was relatively close to him, stunning that guy, then run up, pick up his gun off the ground, reload it, and shoot the guy. And that's really silly, but it's also absolutely something that would happen in a John Wick movie, right. and it's cool. So it's kind of, if you build those systems and balance things well, you can kind of
that's interesting that. It's almost showing that you've got it right, that an emergent...
You're right, it proves I'm very clever.
You're very clever, and you're always right, Mike. No, that you're reflecting the film well if emergent gameplay in the game still would be faithful to the lore.
It goes further as well. We playtest. Playtesting is a big part of how all of our games are done. 'Cause it's really important, and it's a great check and balance to me always thinking I'm right. And we playtested this a lot. A few months back before E3, and one of the most interesting bits of data we got back, because we did like entrance questionnaires and surveys with the people playing. People who were fans of John Wick, not only did they like the game more, which is obvious, like of course they would, they're John Wick fans, it's a John Wick thing, but they were faster at getting good at it, because they were trying to play it properly. They were trying to be John Wick. They were trying to play like John Wick. Players who had never seen the film were playing it, and they were getting it eventually. They were kind of getting into the rhythm of it and understanding it. But there was one woman who came in who was not a strategy player much. She was a gamer, but not particularly into strategy games, but a massive John Wick fan. didn't turn up in a John Wick t-shirt, but was like not a million miles away from
Right.
that. Was very excited about John Wick. And she played the game and like it took 2 minutes, and she was doing all these cool emergent strategies because she'd seen the movie, so she was just trying stuff she'd seen in the film. And that's when you see that, that's very exciting. Of course, then there were also, I should point out, it's playtesting, so there were 100 UX problems that we had to solve to make her have an actually good time while she was doing that. But like,
But almost
seeing that, you're like,
yeah.
there's a thing that's clicking there. So yeah.
I'm going to change tact a bit, but first I'll just mention something I forgot to say at the beginning is we'll have a little window for you guys to ask questions. So do, get the old grey matter ticking on that note, and don't be afraid to put your hand up at the end. But yeah, to change tack, I just wanted to talk about, you mentioned that Lionsgate were to a degree already open-minded to embracing, I think you said weird indie games, maybe they would have worded it differently, but they were open-minded to embracing different stuff. Mm-hmm. There does seem to be an increasing opportunity to embrace license for smaller studios, middle-sized studios of every kind to do different genres within movie IP and license IP. But it's easy enough to got chatting with somebody on the tube or at the pub. And I guess I'm getting towards something we were briefly, or you were talking about, he uses Twitter quite a bit, ladies and gentlemen, that whole like luck and hard work thing. Just be interesting, I don't really know where I'm going with it. No, I do know where I'm going with this question. I just don't know how to ask it very succinctly. But, is this an opportunity that would be open to lots of smaller and mid-sized teams that you can end up working with a major studio? Is that just luck in inverted
My
commas?
friend was working on John Wick is probably the most privileged story like you could ever kind of imagine. There's definitely an aspect of like, it is about knowing the right person. Unfortunately, I think that will always be the case as long as human beings are human beings. I think, unfortunately, these things, you do see different other opportunities. I remember, was it Universal last year did a thing where they like opened up like pitches of like the Jaws IP and stuff. I don't know if anything came of that, but I remember they had Jaws, I think Back to the Future, and they basically just opened up some of their IP and said, hey, if anyone wants to pitch us on this. And I genuinely don't know if anything ever came of that, and I don't know, maybe those games are in development, which would be really cool. But it's definitely, ultimately it comes down to knowing people and working with people. So Ben I'd worked with on Volume, he used to work at Sony, so we'd worked together when he was on PS4. That was an in that definitely was only available to me. And I think as well, there's also a specific kind of studio that make this kind of project make sense for. You definitely need to be at a stage. We're very lucky. We're very lucky in lots of different ways. We've been around. So Thomas Was Alone came out 7 years ago, and then it actually bombed, and then about 6 months later it actually started to do well enough. So it's been about 6 years, 6.5 years we've been going as a studio since I quit my day job. And we ship lots of games. We've been lucky from a public point of view because our games are relatively well liked, some more than others. And we have like an audience who come with us even though we keep jumping genres and doing different things. But then behind the scenes, I think one thing that's really helped us and definitely helped us with this kind of situation was that we have a good reputation among publishers and platform holders because we ship. We ship on time, we stay within our budgets. If we say we're going to release on a date, we release on a date. There's a certain level of professionalism that we have, which is nothing to do with me, by the way. That's Alexander, my business partner, who basically like cracks the whip on that. But that kind of dual thing of the audience thinks we're cool and interesting, and we try and make cool and interesting stuff, but also, we are seen as people who are relatively trustworthy and professional, means that these kind of opportunities do start to come your way as a result of that. I do see, though, newer teams. Stranger Things game came out, I think, this week, right? Yeah. And that was made by a team of that was a really young team, I think. That was a very new team did that. I might be wrong on that, but I think those opportunities are there. You have to get talking to people, but also being cheeky, and if there's a specific franchise that someone's super into and has a really good game idea for it, then going to them can make sense. And we live in an age where it's really easy to find the email address for someone at a studio or to hit someone up on Twitter. Also, though, I would say that the double-edged sword there is making sure that you get a good deal and you do something that actually is going to benefit you. If you look at a movie and you're just like, I love this thing in this movie, it might not actually be a good idea to try and get the license for that movie. It might be worth just ripping it off and not telling anyone. If, for example, you came out of Iron Man and thought, wow, the stuff where Tony Stark's in like a hologram room and he's figuring stuff out's really cool, you go and make Volume, rather than trying to get Marvel on board. I hope Marvel don't see this. But they should call me. I've got like lots of ideas. But like there's definitely like a pathway there now that I think wasn't there. And I think as well, film people in a weird way often get this more than games people. Like film people, like I said, you kind of have to pitch yourself a lot over and over again as part of the process working with Hollywood folks. And it's actually, I genuinely think it's a good, useful process. I've got really good at selling myself in 2 minutes, and the way that I do when I'm in a room, with like studio heads, that kind of level, like when you go up to the 5th floor at Lionsgate, which is very luxurious. It's weird. It's like the rest of the building is like a very, very nice, cool Hollywood studio, and then you go up to the top, and it's like, wow, I'm in the Taj Mahal right now. This is next level. When you're in those kind of meetings, and I've gotten very good at the pitch for me, which is basically, hi, I'm the hipster, pretentious indie person that you're giving like the 3rd most important Marvel movie coming out this year to, just to see what happens. And Hollywood has that structure where they definitely will. And Marvel movies are a good example. I'm going to stop talking about Marvel in a minute, I promise. But like where they will take a cool, interesting indie director, and because of the structure they have set up for kind of making these action movies on a good schedule, they'll just kind of throw that person in and see what happens. And we don't really do that in games. Games are much more kind of, and I think with good reason, much more corporately structured. Like, no one's going to call me up and go, Mike, do you want to direct Halo? And they shouldn't. That would be a very bad idea. I'd probably do something very pretentious with it. But like in film, they get that a bit more. So I think film people are more into this idea than most. And then Lionsgate are really into this whole giving weird things. If you think about the things the big franchises at Lionsgate historically have been Hunger Games, Twilight, John Wick. Those 3 movies, that first film was a tough pitch, right? Hey, it's about this guy, it's about a dog lover, and bad things happen to his dog, and he goes on a rampage of revenge. No, we're not going to make that film. It's a post-apocalyptic sci-fi centered on a female protagonist, which isn't something that's often done. That's risky. It's a vampire movie, but it's romantic. Like these are actually kind of risky bets. Yeah. With Twilight and Hunger Games, they were successful books beforehand, but still these are original, interesting ideas. And definitely with John Wick, they see that as part of the DNA of the franchise. They see kind of this indie spirit, for lack of a better term, as part of kind of how they do things. So I think they saw this as an interesting opportunity, and still put John Wick in Fortnite, of course, right? You'd be foolish not to, but maybe we can do some other interesting stuff on the side.
Yeah, I wonder, it's only a thought off the top of my head, but I guess every aspiring filmmaker is an indie filmmaker, right? Like maybe there's actually a similar journey into the craft. As to that
it's different to games where you work your way up through the ranks. If you want the kind of to be in charge of a AAA project, you would go and work in AAA for a couple of decades, and that's valid too. But I think given the complexity of making games and the enormity of the teams, if you think about it, like directing a film, the actual act of being on set with the actors and the film crew, there's a scaling up involved in if you're doing that on an independent movie versus a massive blockbuster. But the actual act of making the film is similar.
Broadly,
like it's not
fundamentally the same.
It's process, not being the head of a 300-person team making a PlayStation exclusive action game. That's a very different kind of experience.
You mentioned briefly, or kind of advised about, getting the right deal, and I'm not expecting you to talk about your deal specifically, but just more generally.
So I went in the room and I said no.
No, I just wanted to talk, obviously your games are very well known, and yourself and your games have a high regard, and yet you guys are a modestly sized team and a modestly sized outfit, and yet you've had to kind of couple with the machinations of Hollywood and major studios. I guess, mention a deal there, but just in terms of the practicalities rather than the creativity, how have you found that process? Refreshing, frustrating?
Genuinely, much less stressful than you'd imagine. Again, I think because film is used to these kind of weird scale dynamics in terms of power and authority and that kind of thing, that they're set up for it, they understand it. they're very talent-driven, is the phrase. Is you're always the talent, which I don't love, but like it's a thing that definitely is there and is part of their thinking. There's a few things here. One is we definitely were I think we were very good early on. We made the decision to kind of, when we're talking to the film studios, it's not dishonest, but to kind of make sure we were shaping things in filmic terms. So in terms of the relationship with the film studio, there's me, I'm the director. Sorry, who forgets he's wearing a mic. I'm the director, Ben's the producer, Ben Andak. I want that on the Wikipedia page. I just want his full name on the Wikipedia page. He's the producer, and they understand, okay, this is a filmmaker, this is a director, and this is a producer. And obviously we know that those words mean different things in games, and kind of working and figuring out how to make that connective tissue work is good. The other big one in terms of connective tissue is the game has a publisher, Good Shepherd, and it's a big one, because that means they get to deal with all the grown-up stuff. They get to figure out figure out the process. There's a lot of just back and forth, and as you can imagine, like just negotiating contracts and figuring out how license is going to work with a game and all of this stuff. It's a lot of stuff I don't really care about. I'll read the contract once it's written, but I don't necessarily need to be involved at all stages. So that publisher acts as a really good kind of connecting system. I think I wouldn't want to be an indie studio run out of my living room directly working with a film studio. I think you need that kind of that linkage, and a publisher, that's a really good thing a publisher can do.
I wanted to talk about that little video games pop-up fair called E3.
Tiny little thing.
Tiny little thing.
Although everyone's saying it was much smaller. I never actually hit the show floor this year. I was out in my little room, but everyone says it was quite quiet and different this year. I
guess that's relative to being
absolutely
overwhelmingly enormous. But yeah, you guys, I guess you really showed that a small outfit can stand out in the competition for attention that's E3. As a day job as a games journalist, I'll often have a small team say, should I announce during E3? And there's that payoff of, well, there's so much focus on games, but there's a lot of competition for attention at the same time. You managed to punch through that, and it would just be interesting to hear about, well, I guess almost personally what that experience is like, but how you can meaningfully capitalise on it, right? You get a week where there's a load of attention.
Step one is make sure that every article about your game can include the SEO terms Keanu Reeves and John Wick.
Right.
That's, seriously guys, that's the best advice I can know. So that definitely helped, like obviously. There's definitely articles which were very much like Keanu Reeves, John Wick, Keanu Reeves, John Wick, Keanu, and you're like, you only have to put it once for Google to spot it, you're fine. So it was that we announced before E3, which we announced like a couple of weeks before the movie came out, just to be a part of that conversation as early as possible, put out a little trailer that kind of got people relatively interested, but I think still kind of not quite understanding what the game was, which was very intentional, kind of to tease them a little bit. And then at E3, we did the thing. So Good Shepherd, similar to Devolver, who they share some team members with, stay outside of the E3. They don't do like an actual booth on the show floor. They do bits and pieces and meeting rooms, but they don't do the big stage presence at E3. So they had, we were at a hotel nearby called the Figueroa, which is kind of an E3 institution that has recently been refurbished, but no one knows that. It was refurbished like a year ago, but the press didn't know it was refurbished. So we had a room in the Figueroa that had been refurbished in this kind of beautiful, if you've seen images of it, like amazing kind of avant-garde, very John Wick kind of area, and we could do interviews in there. And it was relatively, achievable to get that done on a smaller scale budget, and then we could bring people to us. And because it was John Wick, of course, journalists were willing to walk a block away from the convention center to come play it and leave. So I wouldn't say E3 was like an indie underdog story. I think there's a lot of like bits and pieces we got just because of the franchise and the world. But then I think because we had a good build, we got really good previews, and every preview follows the same script of we went along because it was John Wick, and we thought strategy game was a stupid idea, and then we played it, and then it's awesome and we like it, and it's like every preview is that structure, and that's exactly what we wanted, and that's really cool. We were very lucky.
I just wonder, you could almost, I guess, any developer through a combination of hard work and maybe a bit of luck or whatever circumstance could suddenly have this attention. But I guess there's maintaining that. Like, have you found does that just naturally happen after that much attention that the balls are rolling?
Or with E3? Obviously it was a big bubble of attention. I think now it's kind of chilling out. Like, obviously I've got the Twitter search and the Google alerts set up for mentions of the game, and that's obviously tailing off now because of the E3 kind of dissipating. And yeah, we'll hit the next beat when we do.
Nice one. Right,
There's some good stuff coming up. We got some fun stuff to share.
I was trying to remember earlier. I think I saw Keanu Reeves at Glastonbury. Was he in that band Dogstar? I think he had a band.
We are outside of the realms of my knowledge of Keanu Reeves'
Yeah,
life.
I think, or it was Jared Leto. I can't remember which, but I saw one of them in a band at Glastonbury in about 1996. So I feel closer to Keanu than yourself. We enter our amazingly. Already the clock is ticking. I've got a couple more, but did anyone in the audience want to ask any questions? Excellent. We haven't got a microphone, so if you shout at us and Mike will repeat it. So yeah, chap in the check shirt.
I just wondered for an indie studio like yourself, what you think the impact of services like Games Pass and the upcoming streaming stuff, how that affects indie developers in general.
Okay, yeah. So the question was, how, as an indie, how do I feel? Do we have a term for it yet? Like the Netflix of games, basically, whatever that is. The kind of idea of a subscription-based games library that you don't own the games, you subscribe to a library of games via streaming or via traditional downloading, right? It's gonna be massive, right? That's the absolute elephant in the room. Like, it's coming up, it's gonna change a lot. It was very disruptive. Like, when you look at the history of it with TV, it was absolutely monumental when it happened. I think there's positives and negatives as a short version. I think the positive is that there is a content war. Like, there are enough different places that need stuff for their platform that if you're okay with doing kind of exclusivity or doing content that's timed exclusivity or fully exclusive or whatever, as a studio, there are people who want to give you money to do that, which is ultimately what keeps the lights on and keeps things going. That's a big positive. The thing that really worries me, and this is something that, like, if you look at Netflix, it's starting to get right now, but it didn't at the start, is it's great for incumbents. I can go to one of these platforms and I can say, hey, I'm Mike. I make interesting games and people have heard of us, and I'm absolutely, let's get this selling out done now. Let's do this. You give me lots of money, I make a game, and I'll talk about you on stage about how awesome your platform is for a year. That's fine. I can do that. And I'm in a position where we're lucky enough to be at that stage as a studio. What terrifies me as new people coming up is if you've not got a reputation, if you don't have a contact at Xbox, for example, with Game Pass, if you're someone who's just starting out, there's more hurdles. You can't just release the game and be a runaway hit. Arguably, mathematically, that's been very difficult to achieve forever, but definitely in the last few years. That's the scary thing, is where does the next generation of talent come from? The answer, I think, hopefully, and I'm hoping the games industry gets to this quicker, with Netflix, they actively fund a lot of stuff they know won't be very popular. So when you're on Netflix and you're scrolling past like all these generic-looking sci-fi movies that you're never going to watch, and you're just trying to get past them to get to something that looks interesting, those are essentially director's school. That's Netflix, just like the old days of B-movies, they are funding new talent to go and make these films that fill up the storefront. No one really cares about sci-fi post-apocalyptic future shot in Vancouver, number 23. But it's a good title for a movie. But it's training people up, and I've talked to like young directors who are doing that kind of stuff, and they're working up a portfolio through it. And I'm hoping that the games industry cottons on quicker, so that while the game industry is absolutely going after the recognizable names that will shift subscriptions to their service, they're also going, we also actually have a responsibility here to build up some other people so that there's actually a generational handover at some point and games keep going.
That's fascinating that it could also be a kind of breeding ground.
Well, that's the thing, is that the
talent and
so
ecosystem.
the reason no one's doing subscription models for any reason other than that they're very, very profitable, right? It's much better for a company to get lots of people giving them 10 quid a month guaranteed than it is to make kind of a hit-driven business where you're launching $40, $50 games and hoping that they hit or they don't, and that's enough to sustain you. Everyone's doing it. It's not philanthropy. It makes it's a much better business model from the company's perspective. It's a lot of money flowing in. What happens, hopefully, is that money then gets redistributed out throughout the industry. There's other things, though, that we need to be careful of. Deals which are capped is an interesting one. Is if you look at, like, with Netflix, it's a model that, and I think this is known. Hope it's known. Hope I'm not breaking any NDAs. With TV and film, production companies will go, okay, we're making a TV show for Netflix or a movie for Netflix. We're gonna it's budget plus 50% or whatever. So we're gonna charge there. If it costs us 100,000 to make it, it costs more than 100,000 to make anything. But if it costs 100,000 to make this, we're gonna charge Netflix 150,000. Then they own it, and we're done. Maybe we keep some merchandising rights, but probably not. They get the whole thing, and what that means is you don't have runaway successes. You don't have PUBG. You don't have a game that just blows up and everyone loves it and it sets up a company that could theoretically exist for a decade.
Yeah.
That keeps growth centralized to the big companies. So there's lots of things for us to navigate with this, and we'll see. But yeah, it's massively disruptive, and as ever with indie, our job is to keep the lights on and surviving through it and see where the chips fall, because ultimately the success or failure of these things is going to be down to people much, much, much above my pay grade, right? So it's going to be the bigger things that make a difference. We just need to clamber in the rubble, try to pick up like bits and pieces.
Thank you, that's a great one. I don't like it when the audience asks better questions than I do.
You're doing great.
Anybody else? Oh, fantastic, this chap here.
How was your games research while you were working on John Wick? Because when you're thinking about that type of game, for example, to me, Door Kickers comes to mind. So what other games did you have a look at? What inspired you?
So we looked at most things. It's also really interesting for us because I'm not a massive strategy gamer. I play them, but it's not my main genre that I'm playing at home. But Nick, my co-designer, which is why he's my co-designer, is he's obsessed, and also because he's very good, because he's obsessed with strategy games, and he brought a lot more, I'd say, of that research side to it than me. I was very much the person in the room going, why does no one do this? And he was saying, well, actually, they tried it in these 3 games in 1997, and it didn't work. So it would be a better question for him. I know we started from a point of kind of the XCOM model and then expanded from there, but brought in lots of stuff. And weirdly as well, so we as a studio, like all of our games are always in different genres. The only time we've ever stayed in a genre twice was Subsurface and Quarantine, mainly because we were doing contract negotiations on a licensed game and we needed something to do for 6 months. But like spoilers. So we jump around a lot, and that's bad in a lot of ways. Like, you shouldn't do that necessarily. We're throwing away a lot of experience and learnings from one project to another. But what it also means is I think a lot of ideas we get credit for being innovative on are just because we're taking an idea that we had from this game or an idea we had when we were in this genre and bringing it across. So most of the influences on my side of the 50-50 design direction kind of element of this game have actually been from other genres. There's a lot of Ubisoft UX stuff in John Wick Hex. There's a lot of action game stuff in general, because that's more my genre, and I think that's what's giving it this kind of speedy feel that people are digging. On the strategy side, I know XCOM was big. Into the Breach is an interesting, another one of those kind of hybrid. It's not real time, but they're giving you some kind of precursory information. Trying to think of anything else that was a really massive influence. We ended up weirdly, a lot of it's actually like inspired by like old BioWare, the queuing up actions you could do in like the old Mass Effects and KOTORs, like some of that's in there. So it's a kind of a diverse pool of stuff. Nick would be the guy who could reel off like the 20 strategy games in particular that he copied without me knowing. But yeah.
I have just got the symbol from the powers that be that we are out of time. So apologies we didn't squeeze. Let's do one more really quickly. Did anyone have a quick question to do?
Me and Mike will take the blame. Guy helping out. Sorry.
Just go. No, he's lovely. Everybody.
Dan's doing a great job.
Now after my hilarious joke there, nobody's going. Does any last questions? Brilliant.
Yes. I don't believe they hooked up in the biblical sense. Or maybe in the past, I don't know.
Do you ever consider having more than one character?
So the
question a bit.
Yeah. So the question is, multiple characters are now part of the John Wick universe. Is that something we thought about? So we actually started production on the game before the third movie was written. When I read the script for the third movie about a year ago, it was a surprise that was in there. That was cool. For me, the focus of the John Wick fantasy is about directness and speed. And by removing the squad side of it, we sped up the game. And for sure, that's a conversation we've had throughout, and definitely like on reading the script for the third one and reading even on the page the Halle and Keanu fight in Casablanca is amazing. Like that whole sequence with the dogs. You should watch the movie; it's really good. That was definitely something that we all looked at and went, wow, that should be in the game. I don't think it's not going to be in this game. Maybe if we get another chance, we might play with some of those things. But my biggest fear with the squad side of it would be that we would slow down the game. Which is something that's really important to me with John Wick. You want to be playing almost in real time, almost as fast as you can play.
Right, brilliant. We really better wrap it there. Shame we didn't get a chance for our Lego questions. We were going to talk about Lego.
You have my dream job, man. I'm so jealous of you. I'd love to.
Oh, well, that's only on the side. I do a tiny bit of technical Lego reviewing, but that's not my day job.
Isn't that the best job in the world, though? I'd love that.
It's
What was the latest thing you reviewed?
Set 42099, but I am under embargo. I'm not allowed to mention it.
Oh, you can't say
until
what it.
March
Can you
1st.
say what it is?
Introduces a new remote control system.
Oh.
Anyway, that was very off topic. Thanks for being a lovely, attentive audience. Thanks to those who asked questions.
Thank you.
Thanks to our AV guy and for Dan for being patient. And obviously, thanks to Mike for being right and clever.